Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Brother Mikael.
Salam wa rahmatullah. You hear me?
Alhamdulillah, I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Alhamdulillah. So I'll give the floor to you, inshallah, so that you can begin, and then we'll go from there, bi'idhnihi ta'ala.
Inshallah. Do you have a dua or surah you'd like to recite for a Sayyid?
Inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay, thank you so much. Inshallah. Inshallah, thank you guys for having me. Thanks to the Imam organization for having me on. Inshallah, we'll have a nice program and Sayyid will enlighten us with a lot of knowledge. I will learn as much as you guys in the audience. Thank you guys for joining us and being here with us today. So inshallah, we're just going to have our respected Sayyid answer a few questions for us about the etiquettes of majalis, specifically during Muharram and the majalis of Imam Hussain, inshallah. So we're just going to jump right in, inshallah.
Sure.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So I know for me, for example, Muharram literally comes comes after all of the different celebratory Eids. So we have Eid al-Adha, Eid al-Ghadir, Eid al-Mubahila at the end of Dhul Hijjah. And something that's always been difficult for me is yearly we come off those celebrations, and of course these are like momentous events that everyone should be celebrating, everyone should be happy to have happen. But something that's difficult sometimes for me is that mindset shift once we enter the month of Muharram and once we start actively attending these majalis. So I guess my question for you is, are there any specific practices that we should be adopting before we come to these majalis and before we enter the month of Muharram, and how do we implement them and then maintain them throughout those 10 days and the whole month of Muharram, inshallah?
Ahsant, Brother Mikael. So Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Thank you for this very important question. Basically, as you've mentioned, we have different occasions, some of which are happy occasions and some of which are, sad and tragic. And of course, sometimes it requires mindfulness to shift from, being happy and being joyous when we remember an occasion to being, of course, sad and being, feeling the grief and the sorrow. Before the coming of Muharram, it's vital and it's crucial for us to reflect on Muharram, really to kind of remember and try to understand what Karbala is all about, and to remember some of the calamities that befell Imam Hussain alayhi salam. Perhaps reading a book, for instance, a small book, or even listening to a lecture, or even listening to some of the calamities that are recited in form of lamentation, for example, masa'ib, right? All these things kind of prepare us. Some believers are usually, for example, they prepare their homes for Muharram. They would buy, for example, a small flag or a banner and keep it there. Some of them even, I remember, growing up in a household where they would put something over the TV, like a black cloth, to say that, this is going to be the next 10 days of grief, and that we will not be, watching TV as we usually do, and so on and so forth. All these things, I think, help us enter into this atmosphere of grief. And even our clothing, our attire that we're usually wearing, which is, let's say, colorful and bright clothing, that would kind of change as soon as Muharram sets in. Instead of wearing bright clothes, we start to wear darker clothes, not necessarily black clothes all the time, but darker clothes, just as a sign of grief and to kind of put ourselves in that atmosphere of grief. Of course, with that, we plan on attending majalis and so on and so forth. So it's really different things together that help us enter into that mindset of grief in this regard, inshallah.
Inshallah, thank you so much for the eloquent response. So on that note, I talked about, I guess, kind of the mindset and the things to be mindful of once we enter the month of Muharram in general. But now getting a little bit more specific, once Muharram has arrived and we've decided to go to a specific Hussainiyah, a specific center, a specific masjid, what are the types of practices or rituals that we should adopt before coming to the majlis, after leaving the majlis, and even while being there, while being present, like there at that moment?
Ahsantum, that's very important. Now, the first thing that we need to know before we go to the masjid, before we enter the majlis, like anything else, we have to have, an understanding of what we're doing. A believer does not do things in vain. We first need to understand that this is not a cultural event. This is not just a social celebration. Rather, this is an act of worship. This is how we have to look at it. We have to approach these majalis as an act of worship. I'm not saying that out of my own, of course, self. I'm not using this word loosely. Act of worship.
Mm-hmm.
Act of worship is any act that we do for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have narrations by Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam that consider the majalis and consider the commemoration of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam as an act of worship. So the first thing we need to know is that we need to know what we are doing. We are going to perform an act of worship. So an important symbol of that, or something that would help that, or cultivate that feeling in ourselves, is to perform wudu before we go to the majlis. Sometimes you might say, well, I'll just perform wudu only if there's salah. Even if, for example, the majlis is after salah and you have already done your salah, still good to perform wudu and go to the majlis, because that would give you the feeling that this is actually an act of worship that I have to perform wudu for. Of course, we're not saying it's wajib, but it is, again, a sign of respect, a sign of spirituality, and that you're taking this as an act of worship, as a religious ritual, and not just a cultural gathering. Because some people, unfortunately, do approach these majalis in a cultural way. That's why when you ask them, for example, why do you not connect well with these majalis, they'll tell you, well, we're just here to see our friends, or because we're used to coming here every year. And that should not be the mindset of a believer. A believer should come to these majalis, again, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be in a state of wudu, and plan ahead accordingly. One thing that is very important that I remind myself and remind my brothers and sisters is to come on time. And the reason I say that is because these majalis have, a time, have a set time. And when the majlis starts and there's somebody reciting Quran, or the speaker is giving a lecture, and we happen to come in anytime we wish to come in and walk right in the middle, for example, that can disturb the audience or the speaker or the reciter and so on and so forth. So that's another thing that we should be mindful of before we come to the majlis. Make sure that we're coming on time or before the time if we can. In addition to that, of course, our appearance. We have to show to ourselves, at least before others, that this is not any other day like the other days of the year.
Mm-hmm.
If I come to Muharram's majalis the same way I come to any other majlis, for example, or gathering, I go there as if I'm attending a party or a wedding, not being mindful of how I should appear, how I should act, how I should speak. That would not really be mourning or participating in these majalis with that mindset or that intention. Therefore, it would have to affect me in terms of how I dress, how I speak, how I attend. Of course, during the majlis, listening attentively. It's even good to take some notes. I've seen some brothers or sisters, they would open their gadget to write some notes. If they have, let's say, their phone or a small notebook and pen, it's important, because these are 10 days of investment. We invest these 10 days with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to gain more knowledge, to basically raise certain questions that may come up from the lecture. We need to write them down so that we can probably go back and refer to them later on, try to find an answer for them. These are important things. In addition to that, of course, be as attentive as we can and not be a form of disturbance. Again, this is not just some social gathering. It's okay to socialize towards the end, of course, but not to socialize while there's a program. All these are part of the etiquettes and respect that we have to observe during a majlis.
I see. And are there any specific practices that we should be sticking to during musibah, for example, when they're reciting these tragedies? Or anything specific things that we should be paying attention to?
Ahsantum, this is very, very important. So, some people, when they listen to the musibah, and I know this could be, this depends on the culture, right? People have different cultural backgrounds. Somebody coming from the West is not like someone coming from the East, and so on and so forth.
If I could
So,
just add a little bit to that, because you mentioned culturally, I myself can speak to that because I've lived here my whole life, and I know, especially Westerners in general, I'd say probably, but especially for men, it's like not considered something to do to cry, for example.
ahsantum,
And so for
exactly.
me, it was always kind of hard to connect in that way. So I'm gonna let you continue.
Accentum, I agree with you. And some people are, they grow up with it in their culture. It's normal. They see their parents do it, and generation after generation. So it's not hard for them to cry. While for others, for instance, it's not common that someone would just sit in front of everyone and just cry, right? And this really requires a bit of practicing. Our I.M.A.M have advised those who, like, for example, feel that they can't cry. Maybe you're just shy, right? Is to just at least try to cry by putting, your hand or your palm over your eyes, right? By lowering your head down as a sign of grief, and by thinking and allowing your imagination to travel to Karbala, to travel to year 61 after Hijrah, and just remember some of the calamities, some of the tragic events that befell Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. When we do that, if we don't start crying, at least we'll feel the grief. At least we'll be in the atmosphere. Now, it's not a good habit to just look at the person who's reciting while they're reciting Musibah. This is something that many people do not really pay attention to, is when a reciter is reciting Musibah, at that moment, it's not a good thing to just look at them, right? It's just it's a sign that really the person is not very engaged with it. Rather, when somebody is listening to Masa'ib, their head needs to be down. If they're not crying, at least their hand or palm is on their eyes. They have to show some type of sign that they are, broken from the inside. They are very saddened. They are grieving for our beloved Imam Hussain alayhi salam, so on and so forth.
I see. Thank you so much. And so that kind of leads into my next question, because usually the Masa'ib is towards the end of the program, right? So we finish the program, and then everyone gets up, and then in some places, for some people, it pretty much goes back to normal. You see your friends, you're like, hey, you start joking with them, laughing with them, because outside the masjid eating food, and everything's like, it's almost as if you're like Muharram is gone. So my question is, how strict should our observance of like these type of practices and being in kind of like a more sorrowful state be? So should there be no laughing, no smiling, or even like excessive socializing after the majalis, for example? Like, is this an infringement on the sanctity of the event, the majlis?
Ahsantum. So in general, we have to be practical. I'm not going to say that we have to be, angels and so ideal in this respect. We're human beings, right? We sometimes forget, we may laugh, we may say something. Of course, never it is the case that a believer intends to infringe. No believer comes to these majalis and wants to laugh because they want to infringe the sanctity of the event. No, but it's out of an unattentiveness to ourselves. This is why we need to practice what's called muraqabah. Ulama and the ulama of akhlaq, the ulama of ethics and spirituality, they say this component or this act of mindfulness or muraqabah or observing our actions is an essential key point to purifying the soul. As soon as we are unattentive to what we're doing, this is where the problem starts. So when I come in with the mindset that this is a sad event. I have to, appear in a sad garment. I have to remain sad, show my sadness throughout the program. As soon as it's done, now I'm socializing with my friends. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying salam alaikum, how are you, even maybe smiling to each other, but we really have to keep it limited to the extent where it does not become a normal gathering as our other gatherings. For example, the way I socialize and speak should not be the same way I do on normal days or on happy occasions. Maybe on the day of Ghadir, I'm so excited to begin with. I'm joyful. So when I come, there's, I'm already prepared to laugh or to smile or to, speak with my friends and my peers and probably crack a joke here and there. The environment is suitable for that. But when I come to Muharram, when I come to the majalis of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, I come with the mindset that this is a grief. This is an occasion of grief and sadness, tragic, and therefore I have to try my best to control, what I will say and what I will do. And at that point, practicing it once or twice or thrice or even more would help us kind of get, used to being sad or showing that we are sad during these days. So perhaps, we even make an agreement with our friends, like, look, guys, we usually hang out, we usually talk, we usually laugh, but please, during the days of Muharram, let's put jokes aside. Let's try to be really serious. Think about it. I hate to use this example sometimes, but what if somebody really lost a loved one and now they're attending a funeral? Really, would they act in a way where they're socializing like any other day and joking and laughing, or you find them depressed and sad throughout the occasion? Let's just kind of cultivate this idea in our minds. Let's just think about it. Imam Hussain and what happened to Imam Hussain is a lot more than anything that can happen to our loved ones, right? We believe, and we say this, that our I.M.A., our Prophet I.M.A., are more dear to our hearts than anyone else. So when we remember a calamity that, according to some narrations, made the heavens weep, the skies weep in blood, right? This is something big. This is something great. So when we keep that in our minds, when we stay mindful about it and focused, I think that would help us remain, in control of our desires and what we say and what we do, and avoid these types of things that can be seen as an infringement to the sanctity of this occasion of Muharram.
Inshallah, thank you so much for that answer. And I think you mentioned a very good point of just being mindful about the occasion that you're attending. And this is something that even I struggle with yearly. I struggle yearly. Inshallah, getting better every time. But
life is all about challenges, right? When we get up to do a salah on a daily basis, we face challenges, right? Especially salat al-subh. I'm sure a lot of our brothers and sisters, especially the young ones, face a hard time waking up in the morning for salah. But challenge is part of life. It's part of the test.
Okay. And so sometimes as we grow up, we're given like very general pieces of advice or general traditions that we should follow. And one of them being as far as our practices from the Ahlul Bayt, we know that we should always be like looking respectable, looking clean, looking presentable. So my question is, and it's kind of a similar question as far as, is this an infringement on the sanctity of the event? And so that question is, how far should we take that? For example, should I be dressing up in my nicest suits and drenching myself with cologne and wearing my watches as I come to the Majlis? Should sisters be putting on makeup and, beautifying themselves? Like, where do we draw that line between looking presentable and looking respectable, and then maybe going over the top? Or is it over the top?
Ahsantum. Really, I think the easiest example to put there is if I was, requested to attend a funeral one day, and for another day I'm requested or invited to go to a wedding. I'm sure I'd have two different ideas of how I would be dressing.
Mm-hmm.
When I want to go to the wedding, of course, as you mentioned, I'll probably have jewelry. As a sister, she might be wearing makeup, of course, with the condition that this makeup is not seen by non-mahram. Just because she's allowed to wear makeup, for instance, if it's just an all-women gathering, does not mean that she can expose herself to non-mahram men, because we know that's not permissible in Islam. But going to a funeral usually demands that we have a different style of appearance, right? Rather than wearing all these, the types of jewelry and wearing, for example, bright clothes and different things makes us look like we're going to a party or going to a happy occasion. We have to wear that which really is suitable for the sad occasion. Of course, Islam is not against us for wearing nice clothes, wearing good cologne. These are good. Hygiene is important here, good hygiene. But again, as long as it stays within the limits and it does not show that I am, dressing or appearing in a way that I would appear be when I'm happy and when I'm joyful. I have to try to appear in a way that it can really send a message first to my subconsciousness, to myself, and of course to others around me, that this is a moment of grief and this is not a moment of happiness. So, the easiest thing to do is wear darker clothes, maybe, black shirt, depending on the person who's wearing it. Some people choose to wear black thobe, for instance, this long thobe, the traditional thobe. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be just, if someone says, I really like to wear suits, there's no problem for, a man to wear a black suit, for example. and attend, because that's still acceptable and commonly seen as a clothing that is suitable for a sad occasion. So these things are important to be mindful of. You mentioned the makeup and sisters, and really this is important also. Even if it's an all girls gathering, right? And a sister says, no man is going to see me, so I just choose to wear makeup. Really, would you wear that makeup in that style, in that type of clothing, God forbid, if you're attending a funeral for a loved one or not? So think about like this. If you won't, then for Imam Hussain, you shouldn't as well. In these gatherings, you're going to be crying, you're going to be lamenting. So therefore, it should not be done in such a way that is not suitable for the gathering.
I see. I see. Thank you so much. Cleared up a lot. Inshallah, we'll no longer have these issues. So my next question is that, and this is kind of, I can see how you could tie this back to the first question when we began, but sometimes you see families, and you'll see these families where you'll have the parents, both mother and father, they're very knowledgeable, and they're very respectful of the traditions and practices of the majalis. But then sometimes they have children, and even their older children, even teenage children, will be completely ignorant about these same practices and rituals, and won't have the same reverence and respect for them. So for any of the parents that are listening, inshallah, today, what is one of the best ways that we can try and introduce and like inculcate our kids with the respect for these practices at a young age?
Ahsantum. I think the best way to do it is to show. The best way to teach them is to show them. It is very important. It is crucial. Just like how we have a hadith that say when you are praying in salah and you have a 4-year-old child or a 5-year-old child, just bring them near you. Let them see you. And they start to imitate you. It's important that from an early age, we try to take our children to these majalis. Just seeing the majalis, just living the atmosphere in itself will cultivate that in them. This is how we learn. And this is how we grew up to love these majalis. We grew up to be so attached to these majalis because our parents brought them brought us to them at a very young age. And another thing, of course, that would also help is making the child feel like this is a unique occasion. For instance, when you dress the child, let's say in black clothing, and some people I've seen, some believers, that would put a band over the head that says Ya Hussein, for example. Something as simple as that makes the child feel that this is a very unique event, right? Buying a shirt that says Ya Hussein on it and saying to the child, look, this is a special event. This is Imam Hussein's event. We're commemorating the tragedies that befell him, and you should be wearing this. I think all these things help. And now also we find that there are nice children books that are being published by some of our respected, believing brothers and sisters that teach children, in a fun way how to interact with Karbala, how to learn about Karbala. Maybe a coloring book, maybe a storybook, anything, maybe a movie. Sometimes we have animations that are being produced, although we still don't have much, but all these things help cultivate that feeling in a child where this is a unique event, this is a special event that I have to attend. But again, I want to emphasize on this. Attendance is important. Attendance is very, very important. Of course, if the conditions are good, a person does not have any fears of, the current pandemic that we're in. This is an exceptional case. Some people may not be comfortable taking their children to a gathering because of the COVID situation. But in normal situations, we should try our best to take them. And even in COVID, if we do not make it, or there has to be some type of criteria for children to attend, we still need to show that environment in the house. Again, having a flag, having a banner, not, for example, watching normal TV, basically just watching, the rituals that are being performed in Karbala, for example, because as you know, there will be a lot of different rituals being performed all over the world, especially near the shrines of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, that would also add to the knowledge of the child about Karbala and about Imam Hussain and Muharram.
Allah. So in the beginning, you mentioned how we should be mindful of the event that we're like attending, right? And so you said it shouldn't just be something that we're experiencing as simply a cultural event. But what you described just now is literally building a culture that starts in the household. So I guess my question is, how do you make that culture? How does that culture blossom into a mindfulness in the mind of a child, for example?
Very good. So when we say culture, of course, we're not referring to, so there's two different ways of the use culture. So when we say culture in the beginning, it should not be cultural. It should not be something that we consider as and something that has to do with our ethnic background, something that has to do with where I come from, or because I'm Middle Eastern, this is something we're accustomed to doing. No, when we say that we should leave that type of culture in terms of considering to be an act of worship, I am not coming here because Middle Easterns or Indo-Pakistani or so on and so forth, people do that, rather because it's an act of worship. Just like going to Hajj. When you go to Hajj, it's not because it's a practice done by certain individuals, but because it is a practice that is a divine and Islamic and religious ritual. So that's that. Now, the other usage of culture is how we do things, and that would vary. Some people express their grief in a different way than others. That can be cultural, and there's no problem with that, right? As we know, for instance, in certain communities, the way they lament, the way they mourn is different than others. Even the way they, beat their chest or they do their latum may be different. Some people do latum, some people don't do latum, they do it in a different way. Everyone expresses their grief in a different way. So what's important is that when we teach our children these rituals, there has to be some instruction that goes with it. Of course, at a very young age, it's really hard to explain them to the 3 or 4-year-old, but as they grow, we have to give some guidance about this. We have to, for example, tell them that, look, when you go there, you are going there to console Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. You are remembering the tragedy that befell them. You are basically remembering the atrocities that befell Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. You are rewarded for every step that you take to the Majlis. You are rewarded for the tears that you flow out of your eyes or you break into for Imam Hussain alayhi salam. Then it becomes very clear to them that this is indeed a ritual that is religious, Islamic, and not just something cultural that we do, just for the sake of fun or for the sake of culture or ethnic background, so on and so forth.
Thank you so much for the clarification. We have one more question, but we are running up against the clock. So I can ask it now, and you can maybe give an abridged answer, or we can end it here. Okay, inshallah. So, like you said, rituals, Islamic rituals, inculcating the Islamic culture. Obviously, Muharram is a yearly event. So every year we hear some of the same stories that we've heard since we were kids over and over and over again. So my question is, what are some of the lessons or things that we should be aiming to take from these lectures? Are there specific lessons and ideas and themes and concepts that we should be trying to take? Or is there simply just a benefit in listening to these stories?
Thank you for that question. I think here we have to understand that, the lecture that the speaker presents is composed of two parts. The part that is the educational part, where they're speaking on a different topic, they're highlighting an ethical or ideological topic, social topic, whatever it may be. And then towards the end, there's that 5-10 minutes of highlighting some of the masa'ib, some of the calamities of Karbala, for the purpose of allowing us to remember the tragedy and to grieve and to mourn and to cry. Now, of course, when they mention these masa'ib, they're not going to mention something different. These masa'ib will be repeated on a yearly basis. It's not meant to be there just for the sake of repetition, but this is what happened. For example, when the speaker towards the end on the night of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam says that Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas lost his arms or his hands, right? He can't say, well, we have heard this a lot. This has to be mentioned for the purpose of remembering what happened in mourning and crying for it. And this is normal. Now we have to focus also on the larger part of the lecture, and that is the lecture that has to do with a certain topic. For example, if the speaker is talking about a topic regarding one of the religious beliefs or one of our religious, ethics, or a social issue that he's trying to present and resolve, and so on and so forth. Now, when that is being done, our duty as listeners, of course, is to be very mindful and attentive and try to learn and try to think of ways of how we can benefit from what is being said, how we can connect that to our reality. Two, even if we feel that what is being said is known to us. Let's say someone says, look, everything the speaker has been saying, I know it. There's no problem with that. still does not mean that you have wasted your time, because just the attendance in itself, the live attendance, being under the mimbar of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, being part of that gathering in itself is a blessing. Our Imam Sadiq says, "Ahyu amrana, rahimallahu man ahya amrana." Right? Revive our affair. May Allah's mercy be upon those who revive our affairs. Right? Here we are coming to revive the affairs of Ahlul Bayt. Just attending, just sitting there, thinking about what happened, remembering the atrocities that befell Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. That in of itself is a great blessing, and that is highly rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, in addition to benefiting from what's being said and taking lessons from it.
Right. Thank you so much for your time and your knowledge, Sayyid, and thank you for inviting me on to join you. Hope everyone that was watching enjoyed that and gained as much knowledge as I did. Inshallah, if you have any final words or final du'as, we can end this program, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Brother Mikael. You had been a great guest today with us and presenting very important questions. I really thank you and appreciate you making the time to make it, be with us today, inshallah. And hopefully it's not the last, inshallah, in the near future. We have more events together. And I want to thank all the viewers and all the respected brothers and sisters who came, who greeted, who joined us. And inshallah, we all benefit from these types of gatherings as they all aim to connect us with our religion, with our Islam and rituals, and to keep us closer, inshallah, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The final word I want to say after thanking you and thanking everyone is that, brothers and sisters, Muharram is on the way. Let us prepare well for it. And let us from now intend to be part of Muharram and to be a sincere servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Ahlul Bayt on these coming nights, inshallah. Thank you so much. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآله. Thank you everyone. Thank you. في أمان الله. السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام.